All right. So we looked into the left atrium, and I mentioned that blood from the left atrium moves into the left ventricle via the bicuspid valve. Now, from the left ventricle, blood will move this way into the aorta. So this red big tube is the aorta. And that is guarded, the aorta is guarded by aortic semilunar valves, which are shown by the big red arrow. Those are the aortic semilunar valves, and the aortic semilunar valves mark the end of the ventricle and the beginning of the aortic trunk, or the ascending aorta. And of course, the aorta distributes the oxygenated blood to the rest of the body. Quickly going over the location of the heart. I usually do not put lecture questions from this slide, but it's good information, good to know. The heart is located within the mediastinum and it's angled to the left. So the heart is not very centrally located. It's slightly angled towards the left. In this diagram, we see the superior border of the heart as shown here. We also see the inferior border of the heart. This is the inferior border. We also see the right border of the heart and the left border of the heart. So these are the borders of the heart. We also have a base. The superior part of the heart is called the base, and the inferior pointy part is called the apex of the heart. Now, the heart is a very, very important organ, right? It's a very delicate and important organ. Of course, it is covered by sorry. Of course, this is covered by pericardium. Now, the pericardium covering the heart has two main parts, or there are two main layers. Okay, first, let's imagine this. I put a regular glove, the gloves that we use in lab. So I put one of those gloves. And then I put another glove. So I double glove myself, right? And then I put the big glove that I use for gardening. Okay, so I have a thick, big gardening glove. And deep to that, I have two regular gloves that I use for my dissection purposes. Think of that when you think of pericardium. So of course, so let's look here. So if you look on the heart picture on the left hand side, you do see a white pericardium. The white pericardium is called the fibrous pericardium, and I want to think of it as the big gardening glove. Okay, that's the fibrous pericardium. Now, deep to that, sticking to the surface of the heart, is serous pericardium, and that's the serous pericardium. You can think of it as the double glove. So it has two layers. It has a parietal pericardium and a visceral pericardium. So if you look on the right hand side, this is the fibrous pericardium. This is the fibrous pericardium. Okay. Deep to that, the black line is parietal pericardium, and then the layer that's touching the red heart itself is the visceral pericardium, and in between you have pericardial fluid. Another way of representing it is by my drawing, which I have drawn at the very bottom. That's something that I usually draw on the whiteboard. So let's go over this. We see the red heart, right? The heart is in red. Covering the heart, do you see the light blue layer that is sticking to the surface? That is the visceral pericardium. Then next to it, there is another dark blue layer, that's parietal pericardium. And if you look between the light blue visceral pericardium and the dark blue parietal pericardium, there is a space. That space, the white space, is called pericardial cavity, which is filled with pericardial fluid, which is essentially a serous fluid. And the parietal pericardium and the visceral pericardium, or the light blue and the dark blue layers together, forms the serous pericardium. Okay. Superficial to this, there is a pink layer, and I have labeled that thick pink layer is labeled as the fibrous pericardium. Hopefully this is clear. Okay. Now let's look at the details of these three layers. No, sorry. Ignore that, please. Now let's look in details the three layers of the heart. Okay, first, very superficially, we have epicardium. So if you look on the very left, you see the entire heart, right? So we are making a section of the heart muscle, and we will look at each layer from superficial to deep. So very superficially, this layer right here is the epicardium. Now the epicardium is made up of some tissue. It is mainly made up of simple squamous and areolar connective tissue. So epicardium, which is also known as the visceral pericardium. I want you to know that because I use these terms interchangeably on the exam. So I can call it epicardium, or I can also refer to it as visceral pericardium. Either way, know that the epicardium is made up of simple squamous epithelium and areolar connective tissue. But Rupa, why are we seeing so much fat here? Why do we see all these adipose tissue here? Well, as we age, I want you to know this, as we age, we get layer of fat right below the epicardium. So, and this kind of progressively increases with age. So with age, we have this adipose tissue built up underneath the epicardium, and that's why you see all this fat there. But essentially, this layer is made up of simple squamous and areolar connective tissue. The next layer is myocardium, which refers to the thick muscle layer of the heart. In this diagram, this whole part is myocardium. That makes up the cardiac muscles. And the cardiac muscles, as we have learned before during Unit 1 of our lecture, the myocardium is made up of Y-shaped cells, and those cells have 1 to 2 nuclei. They show striations, and these cells are connected to each other by intercalated discs, which houses gap junctions for very easy flow of information. Hopefully you remember that. So myocardium is just cardiac muscle, and that is the thickest layer of the heart wall. Deepest layer is endocardium, which is right here. Oops, what's wrong? This, man. Why is it so zoomed in? Okay, this layer right here is endocardium, and that is made up of endothelial cells, meaning the cells that line the blood vessels and the heart wall. So this is made up of endothelial cells. Remember, endothelial cells, they are simple squamous in nature. They are actually simple squamous cells which lines the blood vessels. And also we have some areolar connective tissue here. Okay, now we have covered everything related to the internal heart anatomy. We are now moving on to the external heart anatomy, meaning what do we see? What structures we find from the outside of the heart? Now, a few terms. First, we have structures called sulcus, plural sulci, and these are nothing but depressions on the surface of the heart. Again, hear me please. Sulci are depressions on the surface of the heart. And remember, these depressions are there for a reason. Along these depressions, we will find some major blood vessels that carry oxygenated blood to the heart and also drain the heart itself. So we will have arteries and veins sticking to these sulci. And also we will start talking about coronary circulation, meaning how the blood goes into the heart and how the deoxygenated blood is drained away from the heart. Okay, so looking at the external surface of the heart, superiorly we see the auricles as shown by the black arrow. The auricles, we have one auricle on each side, and the auricles, they actually cover the atria. They are flap-like structures that work as covering of the atria. Okay, between the atria and the ventricles, so along here, the atria and the ventricles, between the atria and the ventricles, we have coronary sulcus. And the coronary sulcus kind of goes all the way around. So easy way to think of it, it's kind of hard without looking at a model. Now make a fist with your left hand. Now the fist that you just made represents the two atria. Think of it like that. Then make another fist with your right hand and bring the two fists on top of each other. And this represents the entire heart. The two fists, top and bottom, represents the entire heart. Now, in between the two fists, is there a depression? You can imagine that depression to be coronary sulcus. So, sulcus is a depression that lies between the right atria and the right ventricle. In other words, if I have to draw it out, so we have the two upper chambers, the two atria and the two ventricles. And sometimes I can change color, sometimes I cannot, I don't know. Anyway, so this depression right here. Do you see there is a depression? And it's not only it kind of goes all over, right? It's in anterior, posterior, lateral. It kind of separates the atria from the ventricle. This is coronary sulcus. And then also we have anterior interventricular sulcus. So let's look here. Do you see this depression? That is the anterior interventricular sulcus, and it's the depression between the two ventricles. So on my little tiny diagram, the anterior interventricular sulcus will be here. Similarly, we also have a posterior interventricular sulcus, not shown in this picture, but know that the posterior interventricular sulcus lies in the posterior side of the heart. Looking at coronary circulation, which refers to blood flow to and from the heart wall itself. All right. Now, the gray hearts, right? We see the gray heart. Now, if you notice, there are blood vessels in red, and then there are fainter blood vessels which look like orange colored, right? So there are some red blood vessels and some pale, faint orange blood vessels. Do you agree? Okay. Now, the orange ones are actually the ones that we cannot see clearly, that are not located anteriorly. The blood vessels that are located anteriorly are in red. So the red blood vessels are the ones that are anteriorly located, and the orange ones, or the faint ones, they are located posteriorly, or they are diving deep. So it's not very clear from the anterior side. Okay, let's talk about it. Here we see two major blood vessels. We see the left coronary artery, which is this one. And we also see the right coronary artery, which is this one. Okay, so we have, let me see if I can change color. Okay, I'll make a new video.